Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's virtual event, which is a collaborative, my gosh, put my tea back in, with RSA US and RSA Scotland as part of this year's Fellows Festival. We are delighted to have you with us today for what promises to be a really informative conversation. So in case we haven't met before, my name is Claire Byrne and I'm the Senior Community Manager from RSA US. And on behalf of the US team today, including myself and Sean Kline, who's with us, I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's event, From Pilot to Policy, a Transatlantic Lens. So before we get started, I'd like to give you a little bit of a background on the RSA, RSA US, and cover some kind of ground rules or etiquette about today's event. So some, if not all of you, are probably familiar with some of what I'm about to say, but we have been founded in the UK. We are the Royal Society for Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, and have been uniting people and ideas to resolve the challenges of our time since 1754. And today, the Society exists as an international fellowship-driven social change organization. We're committed to a world that is resilient, rebalanced, and regenerative, where everyone can fulfill their potential. Our proven change process, rigorous research, innovative ideas platforms, and unique global network of about 31,000 change makers work collectively to enable people, places, and the planet to flourish. Of the 31,000 fellows spread out around the globe, about 1,100 live and work here in the United States. And RSA US exists to coordinate fellowship activities in the US with an aim towards moving the needle on addressing the inequities of our society. So before I turn things over to my colleague Amy from RSA Scotland to introduce herself, I'd like to give you just a couple of kind of ground rules about today's event. Like I mentioned when we were all settling in, this event is being recorded. So if you miss anything, or for those of you who aren't able to stay for the whole event, you'll have access to it. We'll share the recording probably tomorrow or Monday at the latest. So fret not. This is an informal and an inclusive space. No question is a silly question. Please do pop your questions in the chat. We really welcome all comments and diverse perspectives. Like I always say at these events, please be respectful. Use language that your mother, your mom would approve of, or as I say from Ireland, your mom. So we are never we're never worried about booting people out if they're using disrespectful language. So also bring a spirit of collaboration, free from judgment or monopolizing the conversation. I always think that, you know, time is one of our most valuable resources. So just respect each other's time and boundaries and feedback in a space like this. And then, like I said, the chat is available to raise points of clarification. So feel free to DM me directly or to DM Amy directly if you have any questions. And we'll also have space towards the end of the event for questions among all of our attendees here today. So without further ado, just a short thank you for listening to me, and I'll hand over to Amy to introduce yourself. And thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Claire. Hi, everybody. For those of you who don't know me or haven't came across me yet, I'm Amy McNulty, and I am the area manager for Scotland. I'm essentially Claire's equivalent in Scotland. So I manage all fellowship engagement activity in the region and act as first point of contact for fellows. Scotland is a great area of the RSA. We have around 1,700 fellows in Scotland. And it's a very vibrant and great part of the RSA community. We have a lot going on, and I would always recommend becoming a fellow in Scotland because you'll have a great experience. And yeah, it's great to be here as part of this event, as part of our wider Fellows Festival, which is great to have an event as part of the Fellows Festival. And also, as Claire said, this is a collaborative event between Scotland and US, which is great as well, because I'm always really eager to work with other areas. I think it's really positive when different geographic areas in the RSA come together, and I'll definitely be looking to do even more of that going forward. And it's also great to be part of an event about a subject that's so important and such a great discussion. So with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jamie, who is I'm going to get his title right, the Head of Fellowship Engagement Nations and Regions for the RSA. I think I got that right, Jamie.
Yes, you did indeed, although I have no idea what that title means, and I don't think anyone else does either. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And as it said, this is an incredibly timely and important conversation for us to be having. Basic income is an idea that has been, it's a very old idea, but one that has really picked up a lot of energy in recent years. Here in Scotland, we've seen debate and policy discussion, as we'll hear a little bit more. We're seeing it grow across the UK, and also a wealth of excitement and development of the idea within the US, looking at cities and areas that are trying to really take this forward. I think it reflects so many of the challenges that we see in society, the insecurity, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the changes to work and how the economy is moving forward. And so it's critical and important for us to be here to have this space to discuss it. And I'm very much looking forward to having the questions and conversations that take place tonight. We talked about the fact of this being an international collaboration, and I think one of the things that's really struck me across the basic income movement has been the global nature of this, the learning and the collaboration that can take place in different parts of the world. And in fact, our two speakers tonight were recently collaborating and meeting in North America in Chicago at the North American Basic Income Guarantee Congress, which was taking place there. Yet another sign of so much of the work that's taking place. So I'm delighted that we're joined tonight by Kline, who's Director of Policy and Innovation for RSA US and also co-director of the Stanford Basic Income Lab, an incredibly important resource within the US and global development and work around basic income. He's going to be looking and sharing with us some of the reflections on how the discussion has developed and the piloting activity has taken place in the US over recent years. And by Cleo Goodman, who's co-founder and project director of Basic Income Conversation, which again has been an incredibly important resource here in Scotland and across the UK, and really not just taking forward some of the policy and piloting opportunities, but also that involvement of wider civic society. How do we really bring people's voices into the conversation? And Cleo, and I know I put her on the spot and gave her the wrong starting time for tonight's event, so I'm incredibly grateful for her ability to be professional and respond to that. She's going to talk us through some of those developments that I know she's been heavily involved with on this side of the pond in recent years, and then we'll open up to an opportunity to explore what this might look like moving forward. So I'm going to pass over to you, Sean, and we look forward to exploring the examples of what's been happening in the US in recent years.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you all for joining. It's really an honor to engage with you online today. And I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, so it's morning for me. I wanted to first just share a map to give you a sense of the scope of basic income experiments around the world. I'm going to put it in the chat rather than share my screen. This is, I would say, probably the most definitive map of experiments there is. And you'll notice something very particular about this map. There's a massive clustering of activity in North America, and in particular in the United States. In fact, over the past 2 years, there's been a proliferation of basic income pilots, referred often in the United States to guaranteed income. And I'll just pause for a moment to explain why that is, at least for now. I think it's primarily two reasons. One, Martin Luther King referenced a guaranteed income before he was assassinated. And so I think the United States, in the wake of some very high profile, visible killings of people, Black people by the police in 2020, that sort of amplified, I think, the need to provide a real racial lens on the power of an economic floor for everyone in the form of a basic income. So that's one reason. The other reason, as some of you may have followed, Andy Yang was a presidential candidate in our past election. And it's remarkable that he lasted as long as he did. And you may remember, some of you, that one of his kind of central pillars of his campaign was this universal basic income. I think that really served to expand an awareness of basic income and to some degree normalize it. But I think, with all due respect to Andy Yang, his policy was sort of a hammer looking for nails to hit. So almost every realm of policy, including the environment, sort of required a basic income. And I think it started to kind of worry many in the basic income field, at least in North America, that this is too broad a brushstroke. So I think there's a bit of a reaction to that. But you'll notice this proliferation in the US, as I said. I think we'll come back to this after Cleo has a chance to speak, but I think that's led to a number of developments in the United States. One, I think it's served to sort of normalize the notion of a basic income as a contemporary policy possibility. Just 5 years ago, that was impossible to say. This was really a fringe kind of idea among policymakers. Certainly, it's been academics and others have been sort of carrying the torch for many decades. And as Jamie mentioned, this is a very, very old idea that has legs. But in popular policy circles in the United States, this was very much fringe. And I was previously in San Francisco City Hall working for the elected treasurer in 2016. And when I started to talk about this idea, you can be sure that didn't do any favors for my professional trajectory in city government. But now it's quite normalized. And what that's done, I think, is offered up a possibility of a targeted basic income or a universal basic income someday as a greenfield policy, meaning a kind of a wholesale new policy at the federal level, but perhaps even sooner at the state level in a large, fairly wealthy state like California. And happy to revisit that. I think the second thing that it's done is it's really imbued, it's sort of galvanized many advocates and left-leaning elected officials to push for some existing cash policies to look more like basic income. So remarkably, the United States doesn't have a progressive standing child allowance like virtually all of its wealthy industrialized peers. It's pretty shocking, in fact. But last year, the Biden administration introduced the child tax credit that was kind of reformed and in fact served as a basic income of sorts for 90% of families in the United States. It's quite remarkable. And that didn't happen without a good push from those who have been advocating for basic income. Sadly, that policy sunsetted, and now many advocates are really pushing to bring it back. And then the third development, I'd say, is all these legacy sort of social safety net programs, both cash and non-cash, other than the one I just mentioned, I think are getting a relook. And I think many are trying to reimagine the existing safety net. And you're seeing something of a convergence between basic income advocates and long-time sort of safety net practitioners to find common ground in a less conditioned, cash-oriented safety net that can equip people who need that safety net with the resources to act in their own self-interest on the things they need when they need them. And we're seeing that in California in particular. The RSA US has co-founded a new initiative called the Benefits Access and Equity Initiative, which is teaming up with counties, a form of government in the United States that implements safety net benefits to really push, kind of move the needle and reimagine what basic income could look like. So maybe I'll leave it there, and we can come back to some of those themes if it's appropriate.
Thanks, Sean. Really appreciate that, and definitely some really fascinating themes around those collaborations around the use of the policy that I think we can unpack in a little bit as we come through. Cleo, can I ask you to share your thoughts and reflections just now, and then we'll open up the space for some conversation.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I think within the UK context, similarly to what Sean was just saying there, it's useful to use projects around pilots as the kind of benchmarks for, you know, how much interest there is and where that interest is concentrated. Pilots do tend to be the proposal in response to a lot of public interest. So I think that steady building of public interest in the UK has definitely been a driving force for that. But then with pilots consolidates that, raises more public awareness, and then leads to probably more proposals of pilots in response to that public awareness and that enthusiasm for the policy. So that is what we tend to see. And I think, important to note that when people are saying a basic income would work for me and for my community, the proposal of pilot is a slightly interesting response. And it's sort of I think we do something to proliferate that as basic income advocates, because there is a bit of a history and precedent for pilots, and because we tend to have to look to pilots to find the evidence on basic income. Actually, it's useful or important for us to be bold about thinking about the real world policy implications. And I think that's what's really massively exciting about what's happening in the States, is that really is embedded in the work that they're doing there. But also possible here is it wouldn't be something like us pushing for a child benefit, because we have a child benefit, so we have almost a universal basic income for children in the UK. But thinking about changes to conditionality and removals of conditionality, consolidation of actually having an income floor in our benefit system, and hopefully the implementation of a basic income in parity here in the UK is the kind of the goal. So I think first contemporary project on basic income pilots in the UK was in Scotland, and that came from a lot of interest in the policy in Fife during a thing called the Fairer Fife Commission, and that led to 4 local authorities, Glasgow, Edinburgh, North Ayrshire and Fife, putting a bid together to Scottish Government to do some work on basic income, and that led to Scottish Government giving £250,000 to that project, which was about scoping out what pilots in Scotland would look like. And the final report, I'm still a massive fan of this piece of research, and that final report, it's I'll pop it in the chat so folks can see. And it really is like a gold standard for how basic income can be piloted. It's a difficult policy to pilot because it's universal, and a pilot by design is targeted. It's a smaller group than you would give the whole policy to. But you have to replicate that universality to test the policy at all, so that work that they did was really fantastic in producing what a pilot could look like that would do a really good job of testing a basic income. And that uses saturation sites, so everyone within that community would get a basic income, and you'd see what happens when everyone interacts when they're all getting a basic income, because that would be what it would be like in reality. However, this very comprehensive pilot and giving a whole community of a basic income, and the suggestion was a high level of basic income of £213 for an adult, or roughly that, and a low level of basic income, about £73, was tested in 2 separate pilots. That was the proposal. They did find that they would need collaboration from central government to deliver these pilots. And that is kind of where I think the line was slightly drawn under basic income for a while. This proposal was published after COVID. So that was another massive moment for basic income in the UK, was the COVID crisis landing. Massive scramble to decide what to do to supplement people's incomes when they were being told don't come to work, and that that was a big moment for us in the campaigning space. We found hundreds of politicians were willing to talk to us and were joining us on calls to develop a proposal for an emergency basic income, and that was a very exciting couple of weeks. We had a letter co-signed by I think 250 odd politicians that we never thought would speak to us. We founded and launched Basic Income Conversation, which was all supposed to be a grassroots campaign about talking to people about the idea of building public support and then putting that pressure on politically. 2 weeks after we launched, first lockdown happened, and we reevaluated and went to this much more political project because there was that political appetite. So we did, again, sort of found that basic income couldn't be the response, partly because of the political reception from central government and basic income not wanting to use basic income as the response to COVID, but also because we don't have an administrative system that would be possible to pay universal payments, which I think, looking at the long term and looking at the arguments for basic income, being able to weather crises like that, having a universal system for income support feels like a common sense response to that hopefully we will manage to put together. So but these proposals for Scottish pilots was published in 2020, so after COVID, while there was still this sort of high of public support. It didn't lead to the agreement from central government to collaborate with the Scottish government to waive the essentially it was a safeguarding measure for people coming off of the pilot, waiving certain benefits to make sure that there was no conditionality for folks that were involved in the pilot. So that kind of line was put under there a little bit, although it did mean that the First Minister at the time, Nicola Sturgeon, was moved her commitment from wanting to explore the idea to committed to a basic income in an independent Scotland, and work on a minimum income guarantee is currently ongoing in Scotland here, which was sort of the shift of focus. I think it's going to be another very bold proposal that comes out as from this minimum income guarantee work from Scottish Government, and likely to also need more collaboration from central government than perhaps initially anticipated. But I think the opportunity is still ripe for the picking. I think it needs a bit of reawakening in Scotland at the moment. I think looking to other places, so for example in Wales, they learnt from the Scottish pilot about the foundation of their work, or from the feasibility study, the foundation of the Welsh basic income pilot that is currently ongoing is knowing what the barriers were to that initial pilot. So in Wales, they have last summer, started a basic income pilot targeted at care leavers, so people who are leaving the foster care system, are turning 18 from I think July last year to July this year. Every person that leaves the care system and turns 18 will receive a basic income of £1,600 for the first 2 years of their adulthood, which I think is, yeah, it's not a universal pilot. It's limited in what we can learn. However, it is a very, very well targeted pilot in terms of outcomes for that group. Those people will have their lives changed, and I'm sure we will see the impacts throughout their lives if that evaluation does continue. And yeah, I remember hearing that pilot was definitely going ahead and just feeling this massive sense of relief and joy that there were 500 people in the UK that were going to be receiving a basic income for the first time. So yeah, fantastic project, and really hopeful that Welsh Government are considering making that a permanent policy and then potentially exploring basic income with different groups in the future. The final point I'll make is about a piece of our own work, which it's potentially, hopefully, increasingly likely to boast about good bits of work that we're doing. But last week, as you may have seen in the British media, we published a proposal for 2 very small basic income pilots that are very much influenced and inspired by the pilots that have been ongoing in the US since 2018 and since the initial pilot in Stockton, California. 2 small pilots in Jarrow in the northeast of England and Grange in East Finchley, which is in North London. And those pilots came from collaboration with the community. We worked with those communities to produce those pilot proposals. It came from people on the ground there telling us that basic income was an idea that they wanted to explore. And we haven't got the funding invested, unfortunately, for those pilots just yet, but we are working hard on that and hope to get them off the ground. But I think, for me, certainly, the explosion of interest around those pilot proposals really shows that there is just a massive amount of appetite for basic income in the UK, and it really just takes us pushing the right buttons and yeah, continuing to drive forward the idea. And as long as people are trailblazing that, then other people will join in, and I'm hopeful that will include them handing over nearly £2 million so we can do these pilots. I'll stop talking there. I hope that was about the right amount.
Fantastic, Cleo. And I really appreciate that. And as you say, really exciting to see that kind of resurgence of energy. I think there was a real sense of us being on the cusp of something maybe a few years ago, but the political nature of Scotland and the UK held us back from that. And there is always that risk of losing out within there. And again, you know, the work in Wales and elsewhere is such a great global example. I think it's Santa Clara in California introduced a similar basic income approach for their care leavers, which they, I think, made permanent after a pilot period. So I suppose maybe if I can take the chance to ask a kind of few questions on what you both discussed, and then for everyone else, please start thinking about your questions, comments, how you want to join the discussion with us. I suppose there's something around that sense. There's been a debate about the kind of usefulness of pilots, whether pilots can sometimes be an excuse not to go forward with policy. And of course, there's then an additional layer that when those pilots are very targeted, which I think, you know, most of the pilots we've seen by nature, as you said, Cleo, would have to be, that there can be a challenge of how you then translate results to look into a universal system from there. So I wondered whether either of you could share a bit more of your thinking, either of your own thoughts on this, or where you've encountered proposed or in practice pilots, around how we can try and balance that. So whether targeting care leavers, for example, can be a step towards basic income, or does it become a policy that's seen as just people participating within that particular cohort?
I can jump in, I guess. I think there's something of a tension in the United States now among advocates around whether there's really a need for any more pilots. As some on this call will know, unconditional cash and conditional cash is one of the most researched topics in the world. Across Asia, Africa, and Latin America for decades, we've had evidence coming in about the positive benefits of cash. We're now starting to see a lot of new evidence, and over the next 2 years, we'll see even greater amount of evidence come forth from existing pilots. But I think there's really kind of a concern that more pilots may not really lead to more appreciation of what a basic income can do. So that's where I think to my earlier comments, we're starting to look at pressure on state government, specifically in California, and the federal government, given the current administration, to look at ways in which existing policies could be reshaped and reimagined. Having said that, I'm glad Cleo mentioned COVID, because I failed to mention that I think was a really pivotal, really profound sort of development, certainly for all of us. But for the case for basic income, I think it just was a window that opened up, and not one any of us could have imagined. And I think it really speaks to the need for scenario planning and imagining that unanticipated opportunities will come, and will we be ready with the policy insights and proposals that could fit the moment. Last year, I authored this document called Basic Income in Local Government, because I knew there was a whole number of city and county governments still using federal aid, federal funds to push out policies, including basic income. So while at this point I'm not advocating for new pilots, they're still coming online. It's pretty remarkable. So this is really to equip policymakers at the local level to keep piloting. And then, and I'll just share that resource. And then I think one other thing I'll add is to really harvest the evidence that's coming over the next 2 years, when many of these pilots will sunset. I helped launch what we're calling an online dashboard. I'll just put it in the chat here. And basically it's 30 plus pilots with data visualized to reflect kind of what we're finding almost in real time from a host of many of the active pilots right now. It's currently just reflecting spending data and the demographic makeup of pilots, but over the next 2 years, we'll have a whole array of evidence coming online that will be reflected visually. And I'm hoping that will kind of inform policymakers thinking about what could happen at the state and federal level. And then just one last point. I failed to mention earlier that I think there's the elephant in the room in the United States is really this question of universal versus targeted. And I'm glad, Jamie, you noted that pilots, by their very definition, are targeted because it's a subset of a population. But I think there's a real tension around among many advocates about whether we should ultimately be striving for a universal policy that, among other benefits, minimizes or diminishes stigma for any one person or family receiving it, and a targeted benefit that many would argue are really intended to use finite resources for those who need it most. So my hope is that in the next 6 months to 8 months, and I'll be working to support this, we'll be creating more fora to kind of debate and discuss that as we move forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Sean. Cleo, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, and Jamie, I feel like we've disagreed and respectfully on this in the past, and but for me, and for the work that we're currently doing on pilots, it's about short-term feasible work that we can do now. And I think pilots have a data generation role. You know, it helps us learn more about what basic income would do. But for us and for the folks that we've worked with on these pilots, it's about getting a basic income in people's hands as soon as possible. You know, I really do think it's crucial. It's super important to not underestimate how big that is. You know, like I'm clicking on the link that Sean's put in the chat with the guaranteed income pilots dashboard. There's 7,341 people that they're talking about there that data is collected from, that have received a basic income, whose lives, you know, the positive data that we're looking at visualized there, whose lives that actually affected. And that is something that we can do now. And I just don't see any other more compelling route to getting more political buy-in to basic income, to getting basic incomes into people's pockets sooner than pilots. What I think is opportunity is to wrestle pilots off of government and do them ourselves in the short term, so the ask of government becomes do the policy. We've done the work for you. And that's what I think is really exciting about the fact that there are so many pilots across the US that are so diverse and so well coordinated by a central movement. You know, all of that, the fact that people are coming together, as I was fortunate enough to be able to join in with on Saturday last weekend, to talk about, okay, how are we going to mobilize this data and these lessons and these people whose lives have been changed by basic income towards the political change that actually means of policy is implemented. Because it's not, you know, we can say, oh, we don't need to do any more pilots, but then what are we going to do? Unfortunately, democracy is more complicated than just saying, now we're going to do the policy. And in the UK, we don't have a government that will even answer a question about basic income with more nuance than we're not convinced about this as a policy, even when you're asking them to pilot it. So we have to think about things we can do in the short term. And I think, like, again, looking to the States for inspiration in the UK, we'd need a fraction of the number of pilots that they're doing in the States to really, like, exhaust that as an option as a response to talking about basic income. So that's what excites me about them, catching people's pockets and making the cases politically.
Fantastic. Thanks, Cleo. I think you're spot on with that, in the sense that, you know, we've seen progress also get stalled by political necessity or political barriers around structures. I mean, Sean, you're talking about influencing state and federal government. There's obviously a lot of city buy-in in the US from some pretty major cities. You know, in the UK, we've got to a stage where certainly Scotland, we had 4 out of the 5 main political parties expressing support for basic income. You know, Cleo helped organise, and I know Mike Danson's on the call tonight with the Basic Income World Congress. We had the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales speak at that, supporting basic income. So we've seen some of that political buy-in, but where does it lead next? And so having that evidence to show, I think, is critical. One last thing for me, and then I'll please do start share. I see John's put a question. I'll come to you, John, after that, if you're okay. I was intrigued. You said earlier, Sean, about you know, the hammer. You know, Andrew Yang looking for the nails to hammer with his basic income hammer. Sounds like a great merchandising approach that we could launch at some point. But there is that sense of, and it's one that's come up a lot in the debates around the world, but, you know, here in Scotland and the UK, around how basic income sits within that wider suite of policy initiatives. And I just wondered, again, as we're looking at pilots, which again will be quite targeted, quite focused, how does that sit into those complementary policies that are required as well? You know, you mentioned, Sean, about you know, basic income not necessarily being the number one answer for so many of these topics, or it shouldn't be thrown in as that case. Cleo, I know the number of times I've seen you have to respond to the allegations of basic income as a silver bullet or some magic policy that will solve everything in itself. I just wondered if there's anything coming out of the pilots and in that transition period around how we situate basic income as that foundational policy rather than on its own.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. One, that benefits access initiative I mentioned is sort of seeking really to find, as I said, the convergence between some existing safety net policies and a guaranteed income. I can't say anything more than this. I'll just say that Los Angeles County is actually keen to partner on a multi-year pilot around this, which is pretty bold because I believe they're the largest county in the United States. So it's really a big move for them to do that. And what that would involve would be streamlining existing benefits. I won't go into the horrible details of what it takes to navigate public benefits in America, but it's very complex. It's very challenging. It would be challenging to all of us, never mind people who have a lot of other things to juggle every day. But also to address what's often referred to as sort of the benefits cliff, where if you earn, you know, an extra $1, your benefits start dropping off, to twine sort of existing benefits that are simplified with a basic income. So that's a really interesting idea that I think we're exploring. I mentioned one elephant in the room, which was this idea of universalism versus targeted. Another, I won't say elephant, but a tension. You know, when I was in city government 5 years ago, I think people on the left and those who had built their careers, you know, working on existing legacy benefits were terrified of the idea of a basic income, because what they feared was it would kind of wipe out the existing support system for millions and millions of Americans, low-income Americans, by 1,000 paper cuts, and that it was a Trojan horse, if you will. So it took some real work, I think, to sort of bring them on board and say, kind of collectively say, basic income would sit alongside the existing safety net. Well, of course, that's sort of outlandish because we know the existing safety net's rather terrible. So now I think we've evolved to a state where we're having a nuanced, sort of genuine conversation about what could actually go away, perhaps, and might be supplanted by unconditional cash. But I think we're all very sensitive to not leaving people worse off than they would otherwise be. right? So that basic income could live alongside some select, streamlined, improved benefits. Maybe it's around housing, maybe it's around, certainly for people with disabilities and other things, so that we don't lose people, they don't slip through the cracks, but rather there is in fact complementarity there. And just one other comment. One of the big developments we haven't mentioned yet is AI. And, you know, a number of years ago, especially when Andy Yang was running for president, technology, the march of the robots, AI taking our jobs was sort of all the rage among some people. I think there was some concern among some of us that was eclipsing the discussion, not of the future, but of people's economic precarity right now. However, with the introduction of ChatGPT, I think AI has roared back and has become visceral and very, very real, and much less a horizon concern, but rather maybe a next year or the year after concern. And I think that's completely justified, that anxiety. So now we're figuring out, could basic income, rather than being framed and cast as a surgical response to risks and problems and challenges we know of, could it be a more generalized response to unanticipated risk that we can't know or is coming, like COVID? So.
Excellent, thanks, Sean. Cleo? I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Oh, I mean, I've always got more things to blather on about, but I mean, I think there's something about that I think is really important about basic income, which is that it has like 5 core characteristics that all kind of address separate issues, right? So like the universality is one really key one, and that is what makes it sort of quite a sexy and exciting policy, because it's very comprehensive. But the other 4 characteristics, the unconditionality, you know, that is almost a solution that we want to permeate through the rest of our social security system, any kind of benefits, because we know that sanctions don't work, conditions are really difficult to navigate, they lead to low take up by people who are perfectly entitled to those benefits. And we know that sanctions and that regime has significant impact on people's mental health, and you know, anyone that you speak to that has interacted with the system will tell you that. Cash and regular, that mimics an income of any kind, and I think that is really crucial. It's probably a more backseat kind of characteristics that also trusting people with cash and making sure that it's landing in their bank accounts on a regular basis, so they're actually able to weather things that happen in their lives. I think the cash component is probably less relevant in the UK than even in the US, but I know a lot more, some things are delivered in kind rather than as cash. Sometimes that's appropriate, but often not. And then it's paid to the individual. So, you know, that is another response to our existing social security system. Calculating things on a household basis, having conditions at a household basis, have been massive concerns as part of our social security system. You know, the impact that has on families and often women, but individuals generally is profound. So those characteristics kind of bake in, or for me, like we should do more to address and connect the basic income debate to how we change our existing system to replicate those characteristics that are really key. Like listening to folks last week at the Basic Income Guarantee Conference in Chicago who have run pilots, they talked a lot about identifying pain points in the current system. So I think what's really fantastic and beautiful about a lot of that work is that it is so collaborative with communities, that there is such a focus on talking to the people, the end users of the policy essentially, but on these small scales for these pilots. And that's something we do super poorly with actual policy, willfully, I would say, a lot of the time. But we look at policies like universal credit, they have been a failure in so many ways and to so many people. It's not difficult to identify when they are failing, what those pain points are, and change them. And I think, like, yeah, and so I don't know, there's something in that, connecting the response to the problem and to the you know, the flaws in a system, and actually committing to solve them. I think it's slightly unpopular politically to solve problems that you've caused, but essential. And then the final thought on that is adequacy in terms of amount of income support from benefits of social security is not built into our current system. We don't talk about adequacy. It's a random number that's plucked out of the air by policymakers, and people have to live on those amounts. They're not, you know, they're not tied to inflation. They're not tied to rising housing costs. Benefits and income support becomes inadequate very, very quickly all the time in our current system. Yeah, I don't know, that that's something that we need to innovate on with basic income, but also within this debate is all of these really important points. It's about proximity to the people that are the end users of the system and the people designing the policy. So that's the opportunity that we have with basic income, but it's always going to be a kind of ongoing dialogue and a challenging process, but one that we need to commit to.
Fantastic. Thanks, Cleo. I'm going to open up. There's been a few questions in the chat, so I'll call on people, and if you're happy to come on and ask a question yourself, that'd be great. If you don't feel comfortable, then I can ask for you. So, John Cairns, you asked a question in the chat about responsibility for implementation.
Yeah, sorry, Cleo. It's just when you brought up the idea of agencies running.
Oh, you're on mute there, John.
You're on mute there, John.
Sorry, thought I clicked it off. Oh well, there you go. When you talked about agencies being responsible for pilot delivery, I'm quite concerned that, for example, in social enterprise, a lot of statutory bodies rely on social enterprises to deliver on their behalf. And they are small organisations with no unionisation, no pension rights. They burn out because they're doing these things because they care. And it allows statutory bodies simply to ignore their responsibilities, and it's the responsibility of government to look after its citizens. And I would really like to hammer governments with that. This is your job, not ours. I know it's not practical and it probably doesn't work, but I really hope that at some point we're able to say it's not actually up to us to do this. You're being paid to do this. It's not your job to go and blow the world up or fight Boris Johnson or whatever it is you fancy doing tomorrow. It's your job to look after the people. So that is a comment rather than a question. I understand why you're advocating for it totally, but I think it's potentially a dangerous route, potentially a dangerous door to open. Sorry.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. Yeah.
I think that as social enterprise is actually my background, and probably why I have this well, if you're not going to do it, we're going to do it because we care about this and we want to see it happen. Which, yeah, I completely agree. Flip side of that is burnout, and it's much harder for us to try and run a pilot than it is a government. But we have that commitment, and they don't. So that's why we're chancing or we're trying it. 100% agree with this thing of what's the word? Handing over challenges like implementing a policy to agencies and to independent bodies that don't have the right facilities in place, or they don't have the mandate for that kind of thing is not the route here. And I don't know, like I said earlier, in the UK, I think a couple of small pilots and potentially even small pilot proposals like the ones we've already published would be enough to push government to actually do pilots, to take more responsibility than they currently are for this, and to show that people are serious about it. Yeah, I think I don't know, I always see, and probably again because of my background in the third sector, how many social problems there are to solve, and how little, how many people wish they were able to make that their work, doing socially purposeful work. I think that's an enormous argument for basic income, and the one that sort of resonates with me most strongly. The more unconditional income we have, the more we are able to position ourselves to do labour that has a social purpose. So maybe there's something in that. If we're giving people a basic income in our communities, maybe they'll be able to do more. But again, it unconditionally, so without having to make it their job, without having to start a business that then funds that for them, they get their basic income to do it for a couple of years, perhaps. But yeah, it's not perfect at all. It's not. It would be better for government to take more responsibility. Definitely up for joining in with hammering. In fact, that's one of what we're wanting to make. One of the key messages of the pilots is, why are we having to do this? You should be doing this yourself. And we'll see how effective that is.
Excellent. Thank you.
And maybe to your earlier point, Cleo, you sort of do what you can with what you've got in the moment, right? I mean, in the US, for me, government adoption is really the gold standard, if I can use that. But we have a unique historic moment in which at least local government, forward-thinking local government, has sort of taken a step. We've also had massive flows from the federal government to local government to equip them to do that. They say that budgets reflect our values. And so I think when the government budget reflects our values in the kind of policies they push forward, that's really significant. And what's unique, I think, in the US right now is all of these local government elected officials who are implementing and advocating a basic income policy are signaling to their peers across the country that this is okay. Its moment has come, at least in some fashion. And we have the National League of Cities, which is a nationwide sort of trade group for local government that itself, that co-authored that document I shared a little bit earlier. So again, it's sort of a normalized notion of what government can and should be thinking about doing. And also just say one more thing. There's, Cleo mentioned Stockton, California. This is a mayor in a very underdog city, if I can call it that, a number of years ago, who launched a very small basic income that's really set the field afire. It's sort of inspired all of these replications in a sense. And he went on to create mayors for a guaranteed income. And now he has 100+ mayors across the country who've committed and signed on to be a mayor advocating for and or implementing a basic income. He then went on to create counties for a guaranteed income, which is a larger administrative body of government that implements benefits. And there, again, it's growing like wildfire. So I think there's sort of unique circumstances that are allowing us to push government pretty hard on this front. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I'm conscious of our time. It's definitely one of those conversations that you can continue for hours. So I'm going to ask a couple of people to ask their questions together, and then Sean and Cleo can respond there. So Tony, if you didn't mind coming on to ask your question, please.
Sure. Thanks so much. I had a couple different questions at a few different points, and Cleo has been completely on top of it and has basically answered them in the chat in different ways.
Fantastic.
But I can say them again in case there's any additional content she wants to add or elaboration or anything. When you were talking about the youth who are aging out of foster care, and I'm speaking in very US centric language, I know, because that's where I'm from and that's what I know. I was just curious about additional supports that they were receiving in addition to income, as far as things like financial literacy or anything along those lines, because you're dealing with a population who, my assumption would be, if it's similar to the way that it is in the US, likely have not handled money before, and you know, could possibly could use a lot of support and just help in understanding just how they could utilize that to maximize the potential. And then the other question I asked was just about initiatives and ways that people who are identified to receive basic income for these pilots are involved in the creation of the pilots as well as in refining those. So just interested in their involvement in the process.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tony. And I'm going to ask Stephen, I think you'd put a question in as well. We'll take the two together as we head towards the end.
Hang on, let me just swing on to this a minute. I've been on the computer all day, and I'm still finishing off bits of work. My question was really about the introduction of systems. And it was a bit self-centered initially, in as much as I was thinking of state pensions. In the UK and US, there's quite different state setups. In the UK, you buy in, you contribute towards a state pension for when you retire. Now, it's not a direct payment. What you get in is what you get out, but you are paying in order that you will receive a state pension. I can see issues how the UBI will interface with that. Either you stop it once you reach pensionable age, or you get some of your pension deducted from it, or it replaces it. I can see how it can be, if it's introduced, then sort of 50 years down the line, it will all be running quite smoothly because it's one simple system. But interfacing with current systems and pensions in particular, because unlike other benefits, you're not paying in order to receive. With a pension, you are paying in order to receive it. So if it gets replaced with the UBI, you know, pensioners will feel that, well, I've been paying in and I'm not getting anything out of it. And whilst it may be just for the majority, for those, it will feel very unjust. So the question is, has this, you know, the transition really been thought through.
Thanks, Stephen. So some very practical questions there around those kind of unintended consequences sometimes of interaction with our policies, and obviously around the support given to participants in pilots as well. Cleo, I don't know if you've got any thoughts you want to share there. I'll put you in the spot.
I've forgotten the middle question, so I'm going to have to ask for some help with that. But the question about the Welsh pilot, yeah, I don't know the details of exactly what support is on offer, but I know that they've partnered with Citizens Advice Cymru and I think they're called Voices for Care, which is a care an organisation that works with people who have experienced care, to provide some support, some wraparound support. So I think particularly because the UK system is so complicated, which I think speaks to Stephen's question, there is definitely coaching at the start and the end of the pilot to make sure that people are clear how much their income would be based on the basic income payments that they receive during the pilot. Because yeah, I don't know if I made that as clear as when I was talking earlier, but the reason that they're paying the participants £1,600 a month, and that's the same amount that we proposed in our pilots. And that is a very high level of payment, partly because that's great and that's an opportunity in itself to be as generous as possible, but partly because that will be taxed and it will make people ineligible for certain benefits because we don't have that collaboration with central government. So that higher amount means that people are most likely to be better off, and it's enough money that they might want to make the choice to go on participate in the pilot anyway, because they'll be able to keep their income from work and stuff like that. Stephen, the question about pensions, it's definitely an important one. I think there would need to be a balance, I think, between pensions that you pay into and then sort of state pension. If we're replacing the state pension essentially with a basic income, we need to make sure that is fair. And in terms of like how we think about the transition is different for every different basic income model. So, you know, designing a basic income model in itself is very complicated, thinking about how it interacts with every different benefit or income and taxes, and you know that in itself is very complicated. And I know a lot of people have put some work into that, or like put work into that and design those models. I think the debate and the work in the UK is moving more to thinking about this transition, you know, and those models are feeling limited now because we're thinking, oh, actually, but sure, the model is interesting, but then how do we get from A to B? So I think the work that has been done so far on models has been really useful. Now we are starting to think about transition, and hopefully that will also help us shift the debate to something that resembles more a conversation about implementing the pilot and clearer calls to government on that, which will also aid that side of the debate. And do remind me what the other question that I've missed out was, but perhaps I'm talking now.
That's great, Cleo. Thank you. Sean, do you want to add anything to that just before we start to wrap up?
A very quick comment. I love the question, Stephen. You're way out ahead, I think, on this. I will say that, you know, every now and then it's interesting in a room I'm in to ask the question, rather than, say, in France or other countries, raising the age of Social Security, what if we lowered it, right? What if that existing system simply lowered to those who were 20 or 18 or what have you? You know, it starts to shift your thinking about a long-standing benefit that all of us take for granted, something that in fact is an entitlement that is universal, and because it's universal, we have collective ownership and a stake in it, and a political motivation to sustain it. So,
thanks, Sean. And I'll just finish by saying, in 2019, we published a report from the RSA about looking at a basic income for Scotland, and in that we proposed three kind of categories within the basic income. One for children and young people, which should be paid to their mum, the presumption was, for adults, and then a basic income pension effectively, which would be at a higher rate, at least equivalent to the current pension, but would take away the contributory aspect to it. So I'll put a link to the report in there, but I think it's a critical one to keep that conversation and challenge going on. I'm really sorry to bring us to a close there, because I think this is a fascinating and timely topic, and I think I'm very happy to commit us all to wanting to continue this and to have these spaces for these discussions. I know there were some questions we didn't manage to get to tonight, so my apologies for that. as we mentioned, there are other spaces, Circle and elsewhere, that we can start to continue that, and you can also get in touch with all of us. I just want to take a chance to thank Sean and Cleo for their fantastic contributions. There's a huge amount of expertise and practical knowledge there that they've both touched on tonight, but also shared links to in the chat. So I'm sure if we can share ways to connect you afterwards, as a chance to keep that going. But I'll hand over to Claire just to close us out for tonight's event.
Sure. Thank you all so much for today's event. I know we're just like a minute over. There's never enough time for these kind of conversations. So I really appreciate Jamie, Sean, and Cleo bringing your insights, your knowledge, your experience. And I've been frantically capturing all of the links in the chat and compiling them into an email, which all of you will get tomorrow for those of you who registered via Eventbrite. And there'll also be a recording available probably Monday, I imagine. And it's a long weekend here in the States, so hopefully we'll get it out Monday, or if not Tuesday. But we'll continue the conversation on Circle for those of you in the room who are fellows. It sounds like there's a lot of appetite and interest around this topic, and we would love to keep the conversation going. So on that note, have a lovely rest of your afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and enjoy your weekend. And it was really lovely to meet you all and to have such a fruitful conversation. So thank you all so much, and have a great day, okay? Take care of yourselves.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.